how did you plan your GMAT? Like, what was the planning that you did in order to take the GMAT? Like, what are the steps that you thought of? How did you identify the right resources? How did you go about learning things? So, what was your overall plan of action when you started?
So at first I asked a bunch of different friends how they had prepared for it, and
Okay,
everyone always tells you to get the official guide, which I have.
okay,
But I had some trouble just going through these practice tests on a book, on a piece of paper, without actually having I don't know, some verbal interaction or
interaction.
something.
Mhm.
And then I asked some friends what kind of tutoring they took. I heard about different classes, and then I found out about GMAT Wiz actually
Okay,
by attending a few webinars, and I decided I'd give it a try. And I found this platform very intuitive
okay,
and very user friendly. So the way that the platform is set up in order to identify strengths and weaknesses and to completely split verbal from quant was the way was a structure that I needed in order to be able to study in the most effective manner.
okay, okay.
Uh,
So you basically like the plan which was shared with you, the weekly plan which was given, and like you. So it made your life easy by just you have to just focus on learning things, and the study plan part was taken care of by the platform itself.
yeah, that's it. And I think it's actually really it's really good that this whole platform has it asks you how
Yeah, I kind of lost your voice. Maybe that's not sure why.
to work. But it's really good to see how it adapts to the amount of work you're able to put in on a weekly basis.
Okay, okay, okay. So I lost your voice in between for some time, maybe because of your bandwidth issues at your end. But so you were
Uh,
saying that you like the fact that the plan was taking care of your strengths and weaknesses every week and helping you prepare accordingly, right?
yeah, and I think it has it's really good that it has a very organized structure that it shows you from the start. Okay, this is how long the course is going to take, and so you know roughly exactly how long you need in order to complete the course, and that's how I was able to plan my GMAT.
Okay, okay. So basically the deadlines and everything which helped you to get an idea as to when you will be completing each area overall. Right? Good,
Yeah.
good, good. So that's how you planned your prep. That's nice. So were you able to stick to the timelines which was suggested by the platform that okay, 2 months is good enough for you to prepare? Like were you able to stick to the timelines every week?
So on a general basis, I was more or less able to stick on the timelines.
Good.
On the platform, I said I had more than 40 hours a week to work on it. So
Okay.
I would usually be a little under because of all the other things I had to deal with. But I know that I would try to at least
Complete as
or
much
to
as
do the
possible.
most I could in order to not fall behind because I'm moving at a certain date and I couldn't afford to just keep pushing back weeks.
True, 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 true. That is good. So, when you basically use the platform, what was your strategy for? So, what did you start with? Did you start with verbal or did you start with quant?
So my strategy, I always thought that I was much better in math
Okay,
than in verbal.
okay,
I found out that that is not the case.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
so I started with quant actually. I did all quant, and I realized that it was a lot of topics that I hadn't covered in over
Hmm.
10 years, 15 years, and I felt like I was going back to middle school in some cases, where I had completely forgotten some formulas or completely forgotten how you deal with this equation and how you can simplify an equation. So I had to go back through all that studying, and I think all the modules that were available were really helpful. So I spent a lot of time on quant. And then I went to verbal once I felt a little more comfortable with quant. Once I felt I had a general understanding of all the topics that were going to be covered on quant, I told myself, okay, now we're ready for verbal.
Okay, okay, good. So how what you when you went through the quant part of the course, you probably would have seen that as you said there were so many different things that you had to learn around
Mm.
30, 40 topics. So how did you find the structure in learning? Like what are the things that helped you get back on track since you are not in touch with quant from a long time? What were the things that made quant comfortable for you overall?
So first of all, I didn't always go through the exact order of the course.
Okay.
I went through the subjects and the sections that I preferred and the
Okay.
ones that I was most comfortable with at first.
Okay.
So just to be able to tell myself, okay, at least I know this. Now let me learn this again. For example, I enjoyed probability. I enjoyed ratios. I enjoyed profit loss. These are things that I did.
Probability is
Uh,
something which people don't like at all, man. They hate probability.
I know my girlfriend was telling me the same thing when we would study, but these are topics that I enjoy, and on the other hand, I really do not enjoy geometry. I really do not enjoy formulas with cylinders and anything that revolves around that. So I would avoid those topics, and then I would try to do one topic that I was comfortable with, one topic that I'm less comfortable with a day to get a general feel
Okay.
and work from there.
So you started with more comfortable areas to keep yourself motivated to see that improvement happening, and then you put in another topic which you're not comfortable with, so that you kind of get a balance of both the things, right? So
Yeah.
you're staying motivated, you're studying, and you're covering some ground also overall.
Trying to keep a good mix, and also I knew that there were some subjects that I was very comfortable with. Anything else, I know I was able to go through the sections really fast, so I wanted to see, okay, let's get this out of the way, let's make sure this is out of the way, and then let's focus on this.
That's a really nice tip. In fact, that's something which I could also recommend to people like who
Yeah.
have been out of touch with studies along, because I see many times GMAT as a test is so demanding. It's so many things that you have to learn, and especially if you are not in touch, it's very challenging. And this thing is something which can help. So did you find when you're going through the areas that you're not comfortable with, what is the thing that worked for you the most in that case?
So I would participate in whatever webinars I could. I would go through all the videos that were on GMAT Wiz, and actually I know that for some sections I went through video lessons, the same video lesson multiple times,
Okay,
uh,
that's interesting.
because I needed to go through the examples multiple times to go hear things out again, and I wasn't afraid to just go back and, okay, I just spent an hour and a half on this video. Let's go back to minute one and remember what was being said here. And so I'd spend really the amount of time that I felt I needed to spend. And I know I spent a lot more time on some sections than others, to really gain that comfort
Then
and be like, okay, now I've understood this. Now I think I can apply it on another example. And now I can move on, because I noticed really quickly when I would take the video lesson and then you'd have either the concept booster or concept solidifier. You would notice really quickly if you had understood or not the video lesson. And there were some sections where you would barely need to watch the video lesson and it was okay. And somewhere, even if I'd watched it twice, I would struggle.
so in case when you struggle, what did you do? Like, did you speak to an expert through the forums, or did you try something else, or just the webinars helped you out?
No, actually, so when I was struggling, I would ask some. I am lucky enough to have my girlfriend who works in the same environment, so
Okay.
I would ask for a second pair of eyes and another brain to come look at this math question
Okay.
and see the perspective how she would solve it.
Okay.
I had another friend who also helped me, so I guess when I struggled with a subject, I'd ask them how they did it, or we would both take the quiz at the same time. We wouldn't really speak, and then I'd be like, okay, how did you get to what you got? And this is how I got to where I got. And I guess another person in your close circle explaining something because they know how you work really helps as well.
Yeah, they can actually tell you, okay, this is where you're going wrong, this is how I did
Yeah.
it, and that peer learning definitely helps a lot. Good, good, man. And verbal, let's talk about verbal now. So you ended up with a score of verbal 44, which is like a brilliant score in verbal. In fact, if I look at number of people scoring verbal 44, it is less than 1% out of all 100 people who take it. So how was your feeling when you saw that verbal 44 flashing on the screen? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that was pretty surprising, actually, because I remember being very frustrated at some points with some verbal questions, especially with what can be inferred. That is always a question that I was. They ask you what can be inferred, and they give you four options of things that can be inferred and potentially are true here. So that was always a very frustrating question for me. But I guess I really tried to just simple it down. I really tried to tell myself some techniques that were showed in GMAT Wiz that were like, okay, the point of this sentence is to tell you this. The point of this sentence is to tell you this in a paragraph. And once I was able to do that, I realized, okay, I know this could be a trick question here. I know that this could be they could be looking for this, but I read this sentence. I know they wouldn't have put this sentence the way they did if that wasn't the real message. And I guess I would just take it slowly for verbal.
Okay, that's a very important part. In fact, whenever I speak to students, I have a tough time making them understand on GMAT to do well. You should not read fast. You should read
Yeah.
slow. That's
No, yeah, you do. That for me, I ended up actually guessing three questions at the end of verbal
mhm.
because I took a little too much time and I wasn't really prepared for the timer. But I think it's very important to, if you didn't read the paragraph well the first time and you have to read it again a second time, you're going to lose more time than if
Exactly.
you just really focus that first time.
Exactly. Very well said. In fact, that's a mistake I have done as a student. So just to give you an
Yeah,
idea, Pierre, I struggled big time with verbal, big time with verbal, and
yeah.
it was a lesson that I learned after a lot of mistake. I was not as good as you, so I took 6 months at least to prepare properly, and then I was able to get to a 41. I did not have a 44. So honestly speaking, really happy to see your performance. And inference is one question which is probably the most important. If you see in RC, around 80% questions are on inference. In CR also, there are a good number of questions on inference. So definitely inference is very common area. So how did you like go about strategizing? So did you follow the plan that we suggested where we asked you to start with sentence correction, then critical reasoning, then RC, or there also you did something else?
So verbal, I followed exactly that plan. I went from sentence correction to CR to RC.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the only thing with verbal is instead of really, because I knew the general rules. I know how verbal works. I spent so much time growing up in the U.S. I took the SATs and got perfect scores. So
Mm-hmm.
I know this test take. I knew exactly how this verbal thing would function.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to spend as much time on the video lessons. I spent much more time on verbal, just putting in a lot of different questions, just seeing all the different types of questions that I could get. And and there were so many questions where I would get them wrong on GMAT Wiz and just want to throw my screen out the window because of just the way something was just twisted or because of the little word I had missed somewhere.
Yes.
And it's something where was kept being reminded, okay, this is that detail that counts here. That was that one word that was used that made the difference.
Mhm. That is in fact very important. In fact, when we were creating the course, I was having this argument with the tutor who created it. Like, why are you just making
Mm,
a change in this single word? Like, this is a small word which changes every single thing. The answer choice is so close. And then we
yeah.
decided mutually that probably it's much more easier to make a simpler question. If you kind of make a difficult question, then students will get used to the small nitty gritties which GMAT will set you for. So
Mm.
overall there are more hard questions in the course which we personally felt, and in fact the students who take it also felt the same. I guess you also felt that it was slightly more difficult than GMAT.
I can confirm that the GMAT Wiz platform had me way lower than what I was with the way I was answering the questions.
Yeah.
Uh, I would be very frustrated sometimes with the ones I'd get wrong while I was studying because I really understood the question and the message, and
Everything
sometimes
was
it was
done, but there's just one word.
a little hiccup or something that was just wrong.
But did that help you in the test, like to be careful with
It
those
did help me.
things?
It really did help me, and the ones that kind of helped me the most is on the inferences. Maybe I would infer something that was out of context, and that's what GMAT would or the platform would explain and remind me and tell me, look, we said a sentence about this. We said a sentence about this. We never mentioned anything about the price or the economic impact here. So why are you talking about this right now? And these were things that even though I knew these things, I wasn't really applying this. And that's when I would have to go back and read myself over and see
Good.
what happened.
Good. So would you say that it was mostly the explanations of the questions that you learned the maximum from, like when you
Yeah.
solved it? Like, good.
Yeah, I think verbal for me is you can, and I think the verbal lessons there were, especially for, I guess, non-native speakers, there are some very, very helpful tips there. But I think the verbal, to really get a good sense of what you're in for, is go through as many questions as you can, and then you'll see where you're wrong. You'll see where what you're not understanding yet, and you'll try to fix it every time. And that's what I try to do with verbal. But it's sometimes I get very lazy too. I don't want to reread the same paragraph 3 times, so I want it to be focused and be like, okay, let's do it once because I'm not reading this thing, and the text is horrible to read. It's about these horrible things every time. So
yeah, it's like GMAT loves to talk about history in all the passages, almost like half of the passages
yeah,
are around history or something in the past, on philosophy, some really weird things which we are not used to read on a daily basis. True.
and there's just one of the very simple techniques for me in verbal is they like using really big words, or when they would be describing I don't know, medicine or dinosaurs or whatever they want to describe, they would be using these very big words. And actually, when I was reading the sentence, I would just ignore the word. I would just be I would replace it with just Bob, or just a way simpler word that then I can reread the sentence and it would make much more sense for me than these huge sentences with big words.
That's really nice. That's, in fact, that's probably one thing which you will also teach in the very first video lesson. I think it's in RC, like if you don't understand something, don't be bogged down by it. Just read further.
Yeah,
If it matters, you will have explanation in the passage. So
exactly.
good job. And one more important thing that you said, that uh, you feel lazy to read something twice, so you read it well in the first go. So that's another interesting way of looking at things. Nice, man. That's good.
Yeah, I think so. I always found it quite an investment to read 3 paragraphs just to answer 3 small questions. So I didn't want to. First of all, I would always read the first question before I'd start reading the paragraph. So I'd be answering the first question almost halfway as I was done with the first paragraph, or I'd have at least a sense of the answer I was going to give there. And then if I hadn't answered, I'd read the entire thing. If I had sort of answered, I would read the second question. And then I have this. There's certain words where you try to remember where they are in the paragraph, or certain subjects where, like, the first paragraph really spoke about this. The second paragraph, okay, was speaking about the conclusions of the 2 experiments, and the third paragraph is saying why it's different than the first one.
So basically,
And that's what.
doing the paragraph summaries, keeping in mind how the information is flowing and all of it overall.
There's always a structure in all these texts from the GMAT. There's always, the paragraph is there for a reason.
Good point. A very valid point. I always tell every student that there is everything on GMAT is there for a reason. It's not like they're just giving some random factual passage. The author wants to establish a point or negate something through the passage. Just focus on it and you're done. That's all.
Exactly. Always something else to, yeah.
So what was your strength in verbal? Like, I know, like, a verbal 44 means you are good in all 3 areas, but if I have to ask you, which area were you most comfortable with?
So sentence correction for me was always quite intuitive, but I lived in America for a very long time, so I didn't have that much trouble with that. And then the one I had that I was the best at, I guess, would be really as far as reading comprehension. Even though it's the one I think I enjoy the least because it has the most reading, it's the biggest paragraphs. It's the one where I'm able to really understand, okay, what do they mean by this? What are they looking for by this? And there's, I guess, in the critical reasoning, it's only one or two sentences. So when they ask you, what can you interpret from this? There's always many more things that you can interpret from one or two small sentences than when you have 3 paragraphs that are really starting to give you a structure. And that for me is, I guess, why I found it a little easier to go through these bigger blocks of reading comprehension.
Okay. So you found reading comprehension better because there was more information you can infer from. Okay. So CR was one area which we are not that comfortable with, right? Overall.
Okay. No, I didn't like these CR questions can sometimes really annoy me.
Okay, why?
Because they're very short questions. So for me, it's the questions I actually like the most. They involve the least reading possible. But it also, for me, allowed to make the most mistakes possible, because sometimes it took me a while to start understanding, okay, what can I really interpret from this? What are they really trying to get me to do with this, with these two only? So that's why at first I was struggling a little more with that. Eventually, or at least during the GMAT, I started really telling myself, okay, let's narrow down my choices here. It's definitely not A. It's definitely not E. It's definitely not D. Okay, it's between B, C. Now, between these two, what's the difference, the main difference in the point? And that's kind of how I narrowed it down in the GMAT.
That's good. That's really good. In fact, so you were eliminating 2-3 choices as much as you could, and if you were stuck with 2, you were identifying the difference. So when you used to focus on the difference, what are the things that you used to do consciously? Did you go back to the passage or the argument again in that case? What were the things that you were doing in order to notice the difference?
Yeah, so I would actually reread, and this is why I would be frustrated with myself if I didn't get it the first time, because I'd end up going back to the paragraph and rereading it again, rereading the sentence right before and right after it, and being like, okay, why was this said again? And then I'd look at the 2 answer choices that were left, that I was left with, and I'd be like, okay, I'm leaning a lot more towards this right now, and it's usually that. When you're leaning towards a direction, you're usually not wrong about that direction you're leaning towards.
So, but when you're reading it for the second time, it was more to confirm the answer, right? You had a inclination,
yeah.
Right.
When you read the first time, you're not sure all the questions you're gonna be asked. You're not sure what the whole text is, so you try to just get a really general understanding of, okay, what is this? What are we talking about here? When you read the second time and you're going back to read a second time because you're stuck on a question, now you're really looking at the specifics of the words, and you're really looking at where is there a comma here, is there whatever, and how is the sentence built in order for me to be able to conclude.
Very valid point. In fact, that's something I also personally used to do. Like 2 choices I get stuck with, just see the difference, and then just go back to the passage very quickly, just to confirm, like just read quickly so that I'm not missing anything which is there. So good. So what was the approach for CR? Like when you went through the GMAT Wiz course, like you would have like seen a certain approach for each question type. So did you follow the same approach, and how was your experience on the platform learning the CR part?
I guess my approach for CR was really understanding the different techniques that were available. It was really making that effort of, there's always going to be at least two options that you could say, okay, it's definitely not that. And this is regardless of at least for anything in verbal, this is a rule. You will always be able to take out at least 2 choices right away. And once I take those 2 out, I don't even read them anymore. I really just would be like, okay, now I'm really between these 2, and then it was just really practice. I think there was a lot of practice that has to go into it, because you see different types of questions. You get used to all these complicated sentences once again. And once you're used to these questions, the sentences that are being, or the text that are being spoken about, you kind of anticipate the answer that they're looking for almost.
So how did you practice generally? Like, what was your technique for practicing? Was there a set pattern that you followed? Some certain number of questions that you solved every day? What was the approach there for practicing?
No, so verbal, I went through the entire modules and I went through all the practice tests. And then once I went through all that, I realized that I needed to start putting myself on a tighter timer because the time accorded at first is very lenient compared to what you have on
Mm-hmm.
the day of the GMAT.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I actually used the quiz tool
Mm-hmm.
on GMAT was in order to generate. I would do like if I took a GMAT section every day, once a day
Your
for
voice is
verbal, and I would
is
go
not clear,
through
Pierre.
36 questions with 65 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and really just go through as many as possible. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, but
Yeah,
it
so I
is
was just saying
breaking
that I
down.
would go through, use the Quizword tool in order to generate these mock tests. You
Okay.
want me to try calling back now?
Yeah, let's try that. Maybe that should work. Can you come here with your
Okay.
computer? Is that better? Like, do you have a camera on your PC or
I don't
laptop?
have a camera
Okay, okay.
on my
No worries.
PC.
Let's join once again, and you can. I'm not sure. When your phone was little closer to you, it was working well. There was no internet issue. So is it because out of range or something from the Wi-Fi or something? Is that
I don't know. I think my
okay? Okay. Just maybe try connecting with your Wi-Fi and then try
yeah.
reconnecting. Yeah, Perry. This now I can hear your voice, but I can't see you yet.
Yes. Let me turn that on. Can you hear me well now?
Yeah, yeah. It is much better now. So yeah,
Okay. Start video. Okay.
great.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so we were talking about how did you practice basically? What was the strategy that you followed for practicing verbal questions?
Yeah. So I would once I went through the entire course for verbal and all the practice quizzes. I for verbal after that, all I did was really start putting myself on a tight timer
Okay.
and really start. I did like if I was taking a GMAT verbal every single day, I would do 36 questions on 65 minutes.
Okay. From the Quizard.
Um, yeah, from the quiz word tool available, and every time I would jot down all my answers,
Okay.
and every time I had a question where I wasn't sure, where I was like, okay, you have to guess now because you have very little time left, so you need to move on. You need to and I guess that's another big tip is you cannot stay stuck on a question for too long because you're just going to lose so much other time on other questions.
True.
Um, and so every time I would jot it down and I would be like, okay, question number 12, I guessed. And then I would go back on my score and I'd be like, okay, these are the questions I guessed. How many of them did I get wrong when I guessed? And what
Okay.
could I guess have changed or what could I have done not to guess?
Okay. That's nice. That's nice. So what was your cutoff like when you said that? Okay, now I have to guess this question. Like, what was the cutoff time that you kept for yourself?
So I would always try to tell myself 2 minutes per question. Then you realize that sentence correction I would go through much faster. I would be able to resolve these in 30 seconds or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some questions where I'd struggle, I'd give myself up to 3 minutes,
Okay.
maybe 4 minutes, but I don't think I go that far. Otherwise, I'd really tell myself you need to move forward because the first time I took one of these tests, I ended up being like hitting the button pause because I realized there wasn't enough time left, and so I was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is actually I need to go much faster than what I'm doing.
We should remove the pause button.
Yeah.
That's a neat trick. Okay. So 4 minutes is generally like 4 minutes you wouldn't be giving for many questions, I believe. Maybe for one question in the entire test, but mostly it was
Yeah.
3 minutes as the cutoff, right?
No, it was probably mostly 3 minutes. 4 minutes was maybe if I would just struggle on one question, but otherwise it's you need to keep moving.
Yeah, that's a very, very important tip. In fact, I also tell my students that if you're taking more than 3 or 4 minutes on a question, you're actually not going anywhere. You probably have no idea what you're doing there. So better leave it. Let's move ahead.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to do. Good, good. And what about like spending time on analysis of the test? You talked about the ones that you guessed, but what about the ones that you got wrong or right? What was your approach of analysis or making an error log? How did you do that?
So I would always go through. Obviously, if I was happy with the score I'd get on a practice test, I would go. I would do much less analysis on that score. But if I had messed up on a practice test, if I had really not understood something, I would go through the questions in its entirety again,
Okay.
and really try to understand. Okay, why was it not B? Why would it not be B on this answer? And every time, GMAT Whiz kind of decomposes everything for you. They tell you, okay, this is always tell you grammatically this sentence is incorrect, so you can just take it out as an answer choice. You're left with B, C, and E. So at least one of the ones I would always be in those in that range.
BCNE.
And then it's like, okay, between B, C, and E, why you put E? It's not E because there was no mention. You're kind of off subject here. There was no context about this, or you went a little too far in your assumption.
Okay.
Or at least then it was just, this is a much better fit answer. And that's where I had some trouble for me, just being like, this is a better fit answer. Is, oh, but come on, if they both fit, well, how can you say it's a better fit here?
Okay.
And it's always a small word, I guess. It's always that detail.
In fact, on GMAT, there are never two correct answers. There is always one right answer and four incorrect answers. And it's those small words that sometimes we miss, and those small words actually distort the entire meaning. So that's,
which is why I think you also need to focus a lot on reading the answer choice completely, not just because I have a tendency of I don't know if anyone else is like this. When I read a sentence, I will sometimes read what I think I read, and then I reread it, and it wasn't written
different.
like that. The words were not in that order that I was reading, and so I end up rereading it, and I'm like, oh, the answer is actually not saying this exact thing.
Very, very important thing. In fact, I was having a similar discussion with another student. So this guy has a 700 on GMAT already. Okay, so this guy has scored a 36 in verbal and 49 in quant, and he's like now looking at a 740 kind of a target score. So when was having a discussion with him, he was doing the entire reading comprehension analysis really well. He's reading the passage well. He's giving enough time on it, understanding the purpose. Everything is doing well. But when it comes to option choices, he was just reading it too quickly, not focusing on the important words and missing it there. Like okay, all your hard work is gone to waste just because you read it quickly. So
no, and the answer is always because the answer choice is always a sentence. There's usually a comma in there or something. So it is important to really also spend the time to read the answers correctly.
Right. And did you maintain any sort of error log when you were preparing, like any sort of areas where you are weak at, strong at, something like that?
No, so I went through a few notebooks like this with all my notes of all my practice quizzes. I kept all these, and I would always go back through all my notes of what went wrong, and you quickly identify your weak points. Even if GMAT Whiz tells you were weak on this, there were some times where I was like, okay, I don't agree with this. I'm not that weak on that, but I know I am weak on this. And then I tried to I guess I would try to show the system. I'd be like, look, I'm not weak on this point. I can show you that I understand this point.
Okay.
And as soon as you realize what you're struggling with, what's the type of question where when you read the answer, you always have to spend a few extra minutes on it. And for me, it was always these inference questions from critical reading or from reading comprehension. And once I realized that, then you try to say, okay, I know the type of questions that I spend more time on. Now, what can I do to really try to do better on these? And my weakness was start reading the answers a little better, because start spending a little more time on where is the comma put, what are the words, and once I don't know, it's kind of a building blocks here.
Yes, that's a very nice point. In fact, once you know where you are weak at, it is also important to understand why are you weak at it. It's not because it's just an inference question, but mostly inference questions test you on small words in the option choices. You kind of figured it out. This was exactly my pain point, and you deliberated upon the option choices better, and you could see an improvement. So great work there. So nice, man. And anything what are the three tips, let's say you would want to give someone who is targeting a high verbal score uh, as a non-native speaker of the language. So what will be the three tips that you will provide them?
The first one is you will need at least a good understanding of English grammar and vocabulary. At least the grammar part where these, I think you said it very well during the webinars. If you don't understand sentence correction, if you're not doing well on sentence correction, you will never be able to answer these other questions because they're based off some sentence correction issues. So I think that first step of sentence correction, I really agree with that. Of you need to have this understanding and this mastered before able to answer other questions. And then I always like to I didn't never bogged myself down with, okay, I need to do 8 hours of something I hate. I would do, okay, this is my weak spot. Let me spend 2 hours on this right now. Let me spend 3 hours on this. And then I go back to something either on Quant or something I liked that I know I could be like, okay, I am better at this part though in the test. So
Okay. That's the balance out. Let's balance it out with the one that I'm good at.
I think there's a very big mental and moral factor in this exam where if you feel like you understand nothing and you only do your weak points, it's almost depressive at some point. It's almost like, oh man, I have a lot of work to do right now. If you sort of balance it out and you work on these weak points and then you kind of keep enhancing your other points, then you start gaining some sort of comfort.
Great. Any other tip? Like, two tips. First is basically make sure you're good at SC before you move to CR or RC, just to make to have a base strong so that you're doing well there. Second one, you said basically you have to focus on the balancing the areas that you're good at and bad at. And anything else which you think?
I guess my third one is careful with the timer, and because the timer was my biggest work point, and other than that is I went into this GMAT exam saying, okay, I'm taking this exam now. I only want to take this verbal thing once, which is what I was hoping for. I'm gonna take it again now, but at least I know I can do this. And it was okay. Let's do this rationally. Let's do this step by step every time. Let's keep a mechanic to it. Keep a pace. Keep
an eye on the clock. If you are spending too much time on something, just skip it and then move ahead.
Yeah, and don't get discouraged because you're stuck on one question. You're going to be stuck on one question, and then if you have enough time to read the 3 questions that are afterwards, maybe there's 3 that'll be very easy for you. So it's always keep moving forward and always stay rational with your logic of. For me, verbal is it's a game of deduction. I hate reading. I did not consider myself a verbal person.
Same here.
I've been in a math consulting career, so I did not think I was a verbal person. I guess I learned otherwise. But for me, it's just a step-by-step logic.